kana zani chitonga ZANU-PF chitonga kusvikira madhonga anenge amera nyanga kana mutemo wacho futi tinochinja wakaramba achiita nharo toti ndo watinoda kusvikira amen.
As Zimbabwe heads to crucial and critical elections in 2023, a lot of people are crying foul over abuse of human rights, abuse of people's rights, political, social, and economic rights. And most of us speak about these rights from the abstract. We speak about things that we really don't know. Now, we want the people of Zimbabwe to know where these rights are derived from. Or the things that you call rights, are they necessarily rights? And at what point are these rights infracted upon? What is said and most telling is that the biggest threat to constitutional rights in most countries is the government, and that makes it very difficult. Now this is, and this will always be, the situation right now with me, your host, Dara Blessed Mhlanga, in proud partnership with We Lead, who are running a program that is called We Know the Constitution Project. You've got to know the Constitution. That is how you'll be able to defend your rights. Now join me just after this break as we discuss what are your rights, what you should know about the Constitution, and why you should care, in proud partnership with We Lead. Welcome back to This The Situation Right Now with me, your host, Dara B. On This The Situation Right Now, in proud partnership with We Lead. We are running this project, We Know the Constitution Project. How and what matters about the Constitution that you should know. So to help me understand, I've got experts in the room. And we are going to be discussing critical and fundamental areas of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, what the Constitution is all about, is it being respected or not. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It's good to be here.
I'll start with you, just maybe your introduction by way of your full names, and as you do that, I want you to just talk to me about constitutionalism. We always hear people say the issue of constitutionalism, and we don't understand. But yeah, just as you introduce yourself and just introduce us to what is constitutionalism.
Okay, thank you so much, Dara, for having me today. I must say you're far too kind for calling me an expert, but thank you really. So my name is Tafadzo Guta. I am the coordinator at the Constitutional Law Center. It's one of the organizations that was founded by the late Dr. Alex Magaisa to advance constitutionalism in Zimbabwe. And one of the things that we've been doing is partnering with organizations such as We Lead. I think we started this project about a year ago. I remember when we visited Chiredzi and we were talking to the youth on the Constitution. And what we basically mean by constitutionalism, maybe to draw you a good example, is, you know how in our households, almost everyone is in tandem with the Bible. Almost everyone can quote one or two verses of the Bible with relative ease. When we talk about constitutionalism, that's something that we are trying to drive, whereby as citizens, each and everyone should simply know what's in the Constitution, should be able to quote one or two things in the Constitution, should be able to know what are the processes of the Constitution. And why is constitutionalism important? Because just like the example that I've used, the Bible, the Constitution is the one that governs a lot of things that we do in this country. It governs whether we get water, it governs whether we get education, it governs the leaders that we get. So a good knowledge and a good understanding of the Constitution and the culture of, you know, putting the Constitution in the heart of the things that we do helps us as the people. So we have been driving constitutionalism not simply because it's our mandate, but we truly believe it benefits each and every individual in Zimbabwe when they know the Constitution. They are in an informed and better position to make decisions.
Amazing. Amazing. One of the things that the late Alex Magaisa, you know, exuded was his love for this country and respect of the rule of law. And he always tried to make law as simple to understand for any ordinary human being, you know. Whereas we know you lawyers, you know, you use fancy words so that, you know, we think law is some abstract thing. But anyway, thank you very much for that introduction. I'll come to you for your own introduction. And as you give your introduction, I want us to look at the issue now of, is constitutionalism a part of Zimbabwean culture?
Okay, thank you very much, Blessed. And again, I must say you're far too kind for calling me an expert. My name is Raphael Silla. I'm an academic, researcher, and consultant on development issues with a major proclivity and interest towards youth development issues. Now, my understanding of constitutionalism is about the presence of literacy, knowledge, and understanding of the provisions of the Constitution. Is one thing to know about a particular provision in the Constitution. It's another thing to have the ability to digest and understand what that provision means to daily life. It's also about the ensured implementation of these provisions in the Constitution by relevant duty bearers, stakeholders, as well as the respect of those provisions. So that's constitutionalism. And as we stand, there is a real disparity between what ought to be and versus what is on the ground. Because what ought to be is enshrined in the Constitution and its provisions, and what is on the ground is a different ballgame, as we shall elaborate as the program goes on.
Yeah. So on that, I just want you to come in and expand, because this is the issue that has been an issue in Zimbabwe, and maybe also the reason why WeLead has been pushing for the We Know the Constitution project, because when people don't know, you want to have such projects to ensure that they know. Now, what are the glaring disparities between the Constitution and what we see in our everyday lives?
Okay, so maybe before we tackle that, you know about Section 7 of the Constitution? You know anything about Section 7 of the Constitution?
So know the Constitution, but not Section.
I know you're an interviewer, but I'm bringing the question to you.
Yeah.
So there's something that's called Section 7 in the Constitution, which basically puts an obligation on the state to make sure that there is constitutional awareness, that the Constitution is put at the heart of the things that we do, right? So now to your question, when we talk about what has been happening on the ground and how much has this been realized. So the first thing is Section 7 itself hasn't been fully realized, because it talks about issues even such as promoting the Constitution into the curriculum in school, in high schools, in tertiary education, even in public service, right? We find that, for an example, our police force engages in unconstitutional conduct for an example, the Constitution clearly lays out that no one should be subjected to inhumane and degrading treatment, torture, and some of those things just include beatings, right? But how many times have we seen beatings in public, recordings of people being assaulted by the police force? And these are the people who are supposed to be upholding the Constitution, right? So now back to the Section 7, you find that a lot of them, when you speak to them, especially the guys on the police force, and you ask them, do you know that you are actually violating a constitutional right? They don't know. So the situation on the ground comes in two ways. So that lack of awareness now has resulted, I wouldn't want to call it ignorance, but it has resulted in ignorant actions whereby people have been pursuing constitutional violations because firstly they don't know what exactly has been guaranteed in the Constitution.
But let me just try and stop you on your stride there. This is a police officer.
Yes.
Their sole purpose of existence is to implement the law.
To defend the Constitution.
And to defend the Constitution.
Yes.
And they are defending something that they don't know. That's what you say.
Yes. So that's what we have been seeing on the ground, in that in terms of even the trainings that some of the security forces have been going through, there isn't that emphasis on the constitutional aspect. Because what you find is the way that the constitutional democracy is set up is the Constitution is the supreme law. Everything else that comes underneath, even the laws in your own household, have to conform with the Constitution, right? So whatever you do, laws and practices, they have to conform with the Constitution. So at times now it takes maybe, let's say, Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights or Zimbabwe Human Rights Association to go and challenge a certain practice in court to say it's unconstitutional. But it's something that has been happening, right? So another example would be bail. The Constitution has given a guaranteed right to bail of 48 hours, set in stone. Previous years it wasn't there, but the new 2013 Constitution put it set in stone. After 48 hours you should appear before a magistrate. But not even for politically connected people or for the politically exposed cases. You find that even ordinary citizens are spending more than 48 hours in these cells. And at times you would hear the officer blatantly saying, no, their crime was too big for us to release them. But now you're flaunting the Constitution because the Constitution says 48 hours and you are in the opinion that their crime is too big for you to release them. So that training between what's in the Constitution and the conduct that is happening in, like, let's say, the security forces hasn't been aligned. And we can talk about a lot of things. I mean, let's look at even religion, how you marry off someone who's below the age of 18, right? In the religious practice, it might be acceptable. But in terms of our Constitution, which is the supreme law, it's non-acceptable. So if there is greater awareness and knowledge of the specific things that are being enshrined and how they affect the small things that are happening within our lives, I think there will be a better implementation of the Constitution on the ground.
So anything that is not aligned to the Constitution is null and void in as far as its inconsistency to the Constitution is it? Yes. I think there's something that is written like that in the Constitution.
Yes, precisely. So anything that is inconsistent, any conduct, law or conduct that is inconsistent. So it doesn't need to be written law, even conduct, even the way that, let's say, public officials carry themselves, even the way that we carry ourselves in the public domain, it has to conform with the Constitution. Even the way we discipline our children at home, it has to conform with the Constitution, you know. So that's how deep and that's how powerful the Constitution is.
I'm reading the Constitution.
I only have one copy today out of it.
Let us talk about this thing here that it worries me when we hear that a constitutional body, which is the Zimbabwe Republic Police, created by the Constitution. Police officers are peace officers according to the Constitution. Their mandate and sole purpose is to defend the Constitution. But they are, like we've just heard, they don't even know the Constitution. And in this aspect, most of the police officers, except maybe the very top echelons, are young people, are youth. Now, you're a youth expert in terms of that. I want you to connect to me, to our viewers, why we should care that most young police officers are out there using their baton sticks to bash windscreens, using force to beat up people, to keep people in cells without them appearing before a competent court within the stipulated times. How does this affect us as a nation?
Well, blessed, it's basically about the culture of constitutionalism in Zimbabwe. This is not just a practice that is directed at the police per se. It's the lack of a culture of political education in Zimbabwe as a whole. In other countries, the United States of America, for example, at kindergarten level, they learn about the various levels of government, elections, etc. So political education is something that they grow up with, right? But in Zimbabwe, political education is something that you possibly might bump into at university level, something that you might bump into via experience. And it's only when you experience something that you begin to get enthusiastic about it and try and research further. So
just let me stop you there. You say something that you might bump into at university. That means someone can actually just leave university without bumping into it and might not know these things, even as a degreed graduate in Zimbabwe.
Very much possible. Sure. Yes. Very much possible because of that lack of the culture of political education we have in Zimbabwe. People do not know about their rights. In some cases, they are not worried about their rights, and the lack of worry stems from the lack of exposure to the provisions of the Constitution. And that's where it all starts. And there's no deliberate intention by duty bearers and stakeholders at various levels to ensure that every citizen in Zimbabwe has got a clear-cut understanding of the provisions of the Constitution, which basically govern the political, social, economic, and even environmental realities of the lives that we live as citizens of Zimbabwe. So that is the problem there. The lack of a culture of political education.
What is the cost? What is the cost to us from an academic point of view?
The cost to us is the lack of development. Because at the end of the day, when someone has got a good understanding of the provisions in the Constitution, for example, something as simple as the right to education, and they don't know that they've got the right to education, it might automatically mean that as a country, we might not be able to churn out decisive and efficient human capital, productive human capital, which might lead to a decline in our GDP as a country and our development rating as a country. Simple things like the right to food and water are things that the ordinary person on the street might ignore. And if you're not nourished, and if you're not well hydrated, you are not productive. So at the end of the day, the end result is that the development status of our country dwindles and drops. So constitutional literacy is in fact a development issue.
Amazing. Now, I want, before we move away from this issue about knowledge of the Constitution and to go into other issues that link to it. But I've been a journalist for close to 20 years now, and I've covered the courts. And there are times you're sitting in that gallery and you hear someone pleading guilty to an offense that they have been charged with, but they probably have not committed because they don't know their rights. They don't know. They also don't even have access to lawyers. So they're tricked by police officers and the state to say if you just plead guilty, we're just going to give you a fine and you go. And most people just do that. How far is this connected to the lack of knowledge of rights, and what role is the court playing in compliance? In becoming complicit to this, because when because when someone just pleads guilty, the court then just sentences, you know.
Yeah, yeah, which is that one. I'm sorry to tell you that that's quite a worldwide phenomenon. My numbers are not good. That's why I am doing. That's why I did law. But I can roughly estimate that close to over 60% of people in prisons, most of them are innocent, or they were sentenced or given a high sentence because they didn't have legal representation. So access to legal representation is a real issue. It's a glaring problem. So what our government did to respond to that is to establish an area of magistrate courts. And the duty of the magistrate court is to at times assist, let's say, an accused when they are not represented. But now what we find, again, the situation on the ground is where the magistrate is supposed to be playing, or the judicial officer is supposed to be playing an active role in assisting, the accused. For some reasons, at times, it's just the workload. It's too much for them to be assisting. At some reason, they're not, willing. But it doesn't happen. And so that gap now comes back to that constitutional literacy, whereby, let's say, for an example, you are arrested. The moment you're arrested, you tell police officers that you know you're right. Within the next 48 hours, you need to take me to court, right? I need to appear before a judicial officer. And if you don't do that, I'm going to sue you in your personal capacity, because you can sue a police officer in their personal capacity when they flaunt the law. So now that already puts pressure on whoever is handling the case to make sure that they have to go through the right procedures. But again, if I don't know, at times I'm just thinking, even if I'm guilty, even if I'm blatantly guilty, right, it is still my right to be judged guilty by a court of law, not by police officers, right? So that constitutional literacy, because you find that there is an elaborate list of rights of the arrested from the moment that they are being detained to the moment of trial, or steps to protect an accused, even in terms of the statements that they're given. But some people are made to sign confessions that they have nothing to do because they are told it will be dispensed to, So all those things, basic constitutional literacy might even assist, people in that regard. Even when you talk about civil cases, there are sections that are covered within the Constitution that can give, clarity in terms of how we can approach issues of discrimination. Even when we're dealing with, let's say, with our religious sects in our churches, there are issues of discrimination. If our leaders are in tune with the Constitution, they would know that certain practices do not conform with the Constitution. So it's a bit how can I put it? It's a bit annoying especially when you're in a position where you know the Constitution and you know the power that it has, and you know that as a people we sat down and agreed that this text would be a solution to our problems, but the solution is not being utilized. We are not utilizing the solution, because even if we talk about public officials who are not we're not doing their duties or not being responsible, the Constitution has ways to hold them accountable, right? But we are not aware of that.
Amazing. Now I want us to move to the Bill of Rights, fundamental human rights and freedoms. Maybe you could just come from there and try and make us aware what are the fundamental human rights and freedoms that in Zimbabwe one should enjoy.
Okay. So the fundamental human rights, in Zimbabwe we'll call them fundamental human rights because we've taken them in the Zimbabwean context, but they are basically universal human rights. They came from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it means that if I leave this place and I go to another country, the same rights that I enjoy under the Zimbabwean Constitution, which are fundamental, I should be able to enjoy them in another country. So you have the things like the right to life, freedom of association, and the likes. So those type of rights generally are non-derogatory, or they cannot be easily taken away. You cannot just come and have a law or a practice that takes away those rights. And I think what's quite interesting about these issues is before you even know, so I notice it with people who come aggrieved, right? They'll come to you and then they narrate their story and then you tell them, no, this is the right to what. So before you even know what right is, when it's violated, you can already feel that there's something wrong. That's how just fundamental they are. So if I do something to you right now, you probably don't even need to pick a specific section in the Constitution and tell me that, no, this is section 75 violation, but you can already feel that, no, there's something fundamental as a human being that has been violated. So I think that is the essence of the fundamental human rights as prescribed in the Constitution. I would have been able to go through all of them, but it's quite a lot. It's an entire chapter dedicated to elaborating the rights. And I would advise any viewers, any listeners at the moment, get yourself a Constitution. I think it's chapter 4, part 2. That's where the rights are. Get yourself a Constitution, download it. You can easily Google Constitution of Zimbabwe 2013. Just have a look and see what the Constitution says about what you're doing with your daily life. I think it'll be...
But why would someone want to download that Constitution? Can you give them the reason why they should know this right? Or how helpful is it, rather?
Okay, so if you had been following, dear listener, from the beginning, like I said, it is the one thing that is governing the way we carry ourselves on I could say, I cannot say on earth, but within the Republic of Zimbabwe, right? It governs our conduct. It governs the way that, the way that our society shapes. It governs the way that our economy works. It governs the way that our courts work. It governs the way that the parliament works, the elected leaders work, right? And the other reason why it should be important to know it is by the fact that we call ourselves the Republic of Zimbabwe, and by calling ourselves a constitutional democracy, we have all agreed, it means that we have all agreed as 16 million, 17 million people, that this is the text that is supposed to be governing us. So if we have agreed that this is the text that is governing us, then why should you not be able to know about it? It's like watching soccer without knowing what offside is, or not knowing what do the rules say. So obviously you can still have entertainment value, but the understanding and appreciation of the game, you would never be able to have it if you don't understand what the rules of the game say. So that's the same concept with the Constitution.
Yeah, my wife should listen to this. But I want to, I mean, what is the need for young people? Especially as we talk about this fundamental human rights. What is the need for the young people? Because I've noticed that in this country, some young people believe that these constitutional matters, these constitutional things are for those, are for the old guys.
Or for lawyers. For lawyers.
Well, look, the Constitution, particularly the fundamental rights and freedoms, are basic entitlements and freedoms which accrue to everyone on the basis of being a citizen of Zimbabwe, or being a human being, like my colleague rightfully mentioned there. These fundamental rights and freedoms are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they are also guided by sacrosanct principles of human existence, like observance of human dignity, observance of fairness, respect, and equality. So they are important to the youth in that they provide the basis for the holistic development of young people in all facets of their existence, and in turn provide the backbone for the facilitation of development of a country. Let me give an example. Section 64 talks about the rights enshrined pertaining to the freedom of profession, trade, or occupation. And a lot of young people are about to get into their productive years. They are about to engage in a profession. And the Constitution clearly states that you've got the right to practice a profession, trade, or occupation of your choice. But then, if you are in an environment that does not allow you to do that, you must start asking questions. Let me turn your attention to Section 73, simple, basic environmental rights. Every young person has got the right to live in a clean environment, free from pollution, etc.
Those Zimbabweans,
Yeah, and they probably don't know it, right? And at the same time, the beauty about constitutional literacy is when you understand the provisions of the Constitution and what your rights are, it then pushes you to become proactive, to provide recommendations, policy solutions to duty bearers, important people who hold important positions, right? And not necessarily be antagonistic or violent, but be proactive, be someone who is constructive in society and possibly make your community a better place to live in. So that's why young people must be interested in understanding the provisions of the Constitution.
There are certain rights in Zimbabwe that have become very expensive. The right to freedom of association in particular. And for young people, there's been violence around that area for our politics, especially as we go towards an election. And this is a fundamental human right. But let us talk about what young people can do to defend or protect these rights, especially when they're threatened by the state.
Okay, so the first port of call, like we've been mentioning earlier, is knowledge, literacy. The second port of call is to seek platforms for engagement with necessary duty bearers and stakeholders at various levels. At household level going up, even at the individual level, it's time to start asking yourself questions on how to ensure that a certain provision enshrined in the Constitution will be realized. It's about engaging with your local councillor about how to ensure that a certain provision in the Constitution is realized. It's about being active and participating vehemently within a political party of your choice, whichever party you might want to belong to. You've got the right to participate in politics according to the Constitution. It's about engaging with your local member of parliament. It's about imparting information to other young people, because for me, that is where the problem is. We seem to have a situation whereby young people are not very much interested in building the capacity of other young people around various issues pertaining to development, and constitutional literacy is not an exclusion to that assertion. So it's not just about you understanding the Constitution first, it's about you then having the ability and the will to impart your knowledge and literacy to the next young person, and you create a snowball of literacy, engagement, proactiveness, and subsequent betterment of your lives as young people.
Amazing. Now, you said you know there's a whole chapter of these rights, but always, you know, there are certain rights that run within us on a daily basis. You know, there's things that, I mean, should be on our fingertips. Which ones would you want to tell us that these are the rights that we really need to know? You know, I mean, especially for the young people. You know, yeah, I know I have a right to be told to be told why I'm being arrested, you know, immediately upon arrest, because my profession is prone to these arrests. So you know, yeah. But what should we care about, you know?
Okay, so I think again, if we just go back to our start, we should care about the entire Constitution. We should care about most of these rights that have been enshrined in the Constitution, notwithstanding that there are some which affect us on a daily. But here's what I've seen with consultations with people. So someone comes to you and then they'll tell you, so let's say they're reporting on behalf of someone, or they're reporting, for instance, say they were beaten up by Bari police station, right? And then they can see that it's wrong, so they come and report. We are looking for human rights lawyers. You know, there were certain people who were beaten up by Bari police station, right? and you hear through their testimony that person telling you that, no, you know, Mbare police station has been so notorious for beating people. I've known them since the 2000s. They always beat up people. So me in my mind, I'm thinking, so you've known since 2000 that in Mbare police station, these guys have been violating human rights. But just the mere fact that it was not your human right that was being violated, you were not concerned. So if as young people, we get to know about the entire spectrum of human rights, we can be even concerned about human rights that will affect us directly. That means that even for someone who doesn't know that I have to enforce my human rights, someone is there to help them out, to enforce them. But let's maybe get to the specifics. I think the most important one would be the right to life, of course, which is fundamental for the enjoyment of all the other rights. And if you look at it, a couple of legal counsel have been so creative in using the right to life to inform, you know, other things. So like even the fact that I don't have adequate housing can affect the right to life. You know, healthcare system, I can rely on the right to health, but I can also pick on the right to life, you know, as an overhanging. So you have that. And then as young people, we have the right to education. I think education is an important thing. Not going to school and doing books, but a holistic system of education where you're taught life lessons, life skills, and the academic side, and you know, the constitutional literacy and everything. So when we talk about the right to education, a good understanding for the youth should not only mean that they wake up at 6 and come back home at 5 and attend classes, right? There should be so many other avenues that are being pursued by the government to make sure that the youth not only stand out within communities, but even in the international communities. You know, you can look at the Zimbabwean youth and say, no, these are well-educated people, not schooled or learned people. You can tell that these are people who are well-grounded and well-rounded. And then I think the other one that interests me a lot is environmental rights. I think as the youth, we need to have very good interest in that. Why? Because we are the present and the future, and the environment is our gift that we receive from our grandfathers, and it's our gift that we're going to leave to our grandchildren. So it is our duty as the youth, because we can see things in the foresight, we can see things in the long run. Right? It's our duty as the youth to advocate for some of these environmental rights. We see a lot of things happening, going wrong. We see wetlands being constructed on. We are saying nothing, but in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, it's going to be us in that position. We're going to have to fix those things. So I think the youth there could take you know, a proactive role in championing for environmental rights.
Mm-hmm. Now we're talking about these rights, but how do we make sure that these rights are enforced, but that we benefit from them? Because it's one thing knowing about these rights, it's one thing speaking about the rights being violated, but it's another to ensure that they're enforced, they're enjoyable. What is it that we should do, or what provides for that?
Can I take that away from him? Why I had done something before coming here, and I think it was going to be helpful for the listeners. So I don't know if you mind.
I'll come in. You can start, then you can add on. Yeah.
All right. So it's all about instituting various mechanisms from the grassroots level all the way up to national level. So at the grassroots level, we can simply have community-based rights monitoring committees, for example, right? And these are committees that are responsible for evaluating whether the provisions of the Constitution are being met at community level, so to speak. And it cascades all the way up to national level. Duty bearers also have to come in. Local leadership, councillors, members of parliament, etc. must also come back to the grassroots and actually evaluate whether the provisions, the rights enshrined within the Constitution are being met or not. That should be part of the key result areas of their terms of employment as well. We also have national commissions, various national commissions that focus on the provisions of rights to various groups. We've got the Gender Commission, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, focusing on political rights, participation, etc. All those commissions have got the sacrosanct responsibility to ensure the monitoring of the enjoyment of the rights enshrined within the Constitution, right? And not forgetting Parliament, of course, through the various parliamentary portfolio committees. They also have the responsibility to ensure that all these rights enshrined within the Constitution are met within their various faculties, ministries, and elements of responsibility.
Amazing. You can come through. Yeah.
I think I set myself up. I shouldn't have gone after. But no, thank you for that. I think you have covered where I had left out. So you spoke about the various mechanisms that that have been put in place. But there's something amazing that the Constitution again put in place. So the first thing is Section 85 of the Constitution, which basically empowers the enforcement of human rights. It talks about the need to make sure that the human rights are realized, right? Then in turn, the Constitution went to establish what is called the Constitutional Court for the first time. Before, we didn't have a Constitutional Court. Constitutional matters will be heard by the Supreme Court, but we established a standalone Constitutional Court which deals with constitutional matters. And you only need two reasons to approach the Constitutional Court when you are aggrieved, whether you think that your constitutionally protected right has been infringed or might be infringed, right? So those are the two things that you need. I know it sounds that simple, but it's not so simple. There's a bit some technicalities there.
That's why we need lawyers.
Right. Yeah. But I think, let alone just putting those two structures, those two sections, establishing a constitutional court and giving the Constitution an obligation to enforce, these human rights, makes it easier for us now. So if we go back to our constitutional awareness and literacy, once we have a good literacy, once we know what's in the Constitution, then we know that we have Section 87 as our weapon. We know we have the Constitutional Courts as our weapon. We know we have things such as petitions. We know that the Constitutional Court has been explicitly told by the Constitution to not be too fussy on the technical things, right? That it should allow citizens to bring in cases, without dwelling on the technicalities, right? So if we just have a good understanding of this text, we can see that we really do have solutions to some of our problems. So I think, in short, a very good mechanism that has been put in place and that is being used in the current moment. Maybe I can use an example for case law that recently happened with, I think, MET, the law chambers was the one taking it, where they declared the age 16 for marriage was unconstitutional, because the Constitution says the age of majority is 18, but we had provisions in the Marriage Act which allowed a 16-year-old to get married, but it was ruled unconstitutional. So that's the work of the Constitutional Court, right? As litigants, as citizens, we can bring in cases such as that to make sure that whenever we have practices, whenever we have laws that are against the Constitution, or when we want the government, when it's ignoring a constitutional right that we have, that we want to enforce, we can approach the Constitution to have the right enforced.
Now I'm fast running out of time, but you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, just to add on. So when you mix the two, when you mix the community-based approach to the monitoring and enforcement of constitutional rights with the technical legal approach, you get splendid results. So everything must start at the grassroots, going up, you build your cases, and then you take it up. So that, to me, that is the missing ingredient.
Absolutely.
When it comes to the legal system, basically, in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, but I wanted to put you on the spot before we, personally, just put you on the spot and say, how have you, protected your fundamental rights in the case that you have suffered an infringement?
Oh, yes. And that was not too long ago. A few days ago, actually. Actually, because it was a very technical issue, it was a case of property rights, stock theft, I had to engage a lawyer. And the lawyer had to take me through the paces. And I must admit, the role that I was playing there was to simply provide my legal counsel with evidence and information, because it was a very technical issue. But I was very much involved in that. I was helping out with, the taking of statements. I was helping out with the unveiling of witnesses. I was also doing a bit of reading to quiz and push my lawyer to achieve apex performance. So I was not just a mere imbiber of the legal services, but I was proactive in the way that I did things. And so far so good. It's not yet over, but I'm sure justice will prevail.
You're trying to assert your rights to property.
Yes,
but yeah. So I think it's generally very easy for most of us, or all of us, really, to talk about these rights and say I have the right to vote. I have the right, but putting you on the spot, on the simplest things, you have the right to access to clean potable water. You haven't been getting that, What have you done? what have you?
To the extent that the state has the resources available.
Exactly. I wanted you to respond to that, to push me to my next question on the limitations of rights. But we sit there. And we've watched students demanding the right to education, and some were arrested and stuff like that. But let's talk about immediate, the right to water. People have taken it upon themselves, drilling on balls to provide themselves water, because those who are charged with doing that have failed. How do we? Let's talk about this.
Okay, so my legal head twinked when you spoke about limitation, because limitation it's an interesting concept. It's a different concept in the Constitution, and then maybe I can deal with the service provision later. But so for limitation, it's something universal as well. It's not a Zimbabwean thing, and maybe to hone my point, I'll use COVID-19 as an example to show you how limitation exercise works. So we all have rights, right? But the first limitation that we have, if you notice all those rights, is to the extent that it doesn't infringe on another person's right. So that's the first limitation that you have. Whatever you do, you make sure that you're not infringing on another person's right.
So my right to swing my fist.
Exactly. Right. So now your right to swing your fist has infringed on my right to bodily integrity. You've assaulted me, right? So there's a problem. And then there are times where rights are limited for the general public, for the general good. So you can have freedom of choice, right? But there are certain substances that we would not be allowed within the premises or within the country, right? So that I have limited your right. You're free to consume whatever you want, but certain products are not allowed. So now we talk about, let's look at the COVID-19 pandemic. We have freedom of movement, freedom of association, but we now had certain, restrictions that have been put in place, curfews, the amount of people that were allowed to be in an event. But what we can find in all these situations, it's acceptable for the community. Why? One, it's a law. It's called a law of general application. It applies to everyone. It doesn't just limit my right alone. It applies to everyone. So when they said curfew, it meant each and every Zimbabwean was under curfew.
Except me, as a journalist. Except me as a journalist. Yes.
And a couple of unscrupulous individuals. But so that's the concept. So that's the limitation. It's an idea that whenever we're enjoying our rights, they are not entirely absolute, and we can have mechanisms to put in place. Now, when we talk about lack of fulfillment of rights or the service delivery aspect of things, using your specific example, I think it's now merely a matter of application of whatever is supposed to be there, because already we have a clearly established right which says ABCD. We more or less have established infrastructure to provide for that right in terms of water systems, pipes. We even have a regulatory system where they collect bills, they do all sorts of things. So I don't know where the missing ingredient is, but there is, a missing ingredient that's there. And then, maybe just interestingly, we do have the freedom to drill our bores, but there's a limitation to that, you know that as well, right? So yeah, in as much as we have solutions to some of these things, we still live under a system whereby, the Constitution creates a regime whereby it controls our conduct, but for the benefit of basically everyone.
And also for the benefit of protecting your right to life.
The same one.
Yeah,
So just to add on to what my colleague has said on limitations, it must also be noted that despite the concept of limitations being important when we look at things from the legal perspective, there are some rights that may never be subjected to the concept of limitations. For example, the right to life itself, the right to human dignity, the right not to be tortured, the right not to be placed in a condition of slavery or servitude, and the right to a fair trial. Those rights must be enjoyed as is. And if there are limitations, I don't think
They're arbitrary.
they are.
But interestingly, though.
But interestingly, Zimbabwe has but we're still talking about it. But the death penalty
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
is actually a limitation
Yeah, it's a
to
limitation.
the right to life.
Because they haven't clearly outlawed it, right?
Yes.
Obviously, there hasn't been anyone on the death sentence in a long time, but it hasn't been clearly outlawed. Like, so you say you find in South Africa, the Constitutional Court, their first judgment, they clearly outlawed the death penalty. Say the death penalty is not consistent with, the new constitutional dispensation. But and even in Zimbabwe, the torture aspect, there are certain provisions that allow in certain circumstances when you are trying to, get information from someone where the state is at danger, where you may be justified in, pursuing that, that type of measure. So it's always an interesting one.
It's always an interesting one,
that
yeah.
even these absolute rights, these absolute
rights
are not
so absolute.
Yeah. So you could tell someone in Ukraine that they have the right to life, and Russia is bombing them.
Yeah. Exactly. Precisely.
Anyway, we have run out of time. We had a wonderful discussion around our constitution and what we should care about and what we should know about. I mean, these are things that as Zimbabweans, as citizens, and as human beings rather, we should take interest in and know about. But before I let you go, I will ask my guests to give me their closing remarks, from their heart, message that they want to send out there to the people of Zimbabwe, to the young people of Zimbabwe, to the old people of Zimbabwe, because the young of today will be the old of tomorrow, and the old of today are the young of yesterday. I will start with you.
Okay, so my parting shot is simple. It's a question of participation, active participation for the young people of Zimbabwe. Know your constitution, and where you require clarification, seek help. We've got my colleague here who will help you to unpack the meanings of various provisions in the Constitution. Be proactive. You see, it's not just about knowing a particular right or the provisions enshrined within that right and not having a game plan to ensure your enjoyment of that right. So it's about active participation. Things must start at the grassroots, going up. It's community engagement that builds a country.
Dara, you set me up once again. You made me go after this guy. But I think for me, my parting shot to the young people in particular is, let's dream big. We can be bigger. We can be bigger than what we are. I believe Zimbabweans are talented. I've had the privilege of interacting with other nationalities, and I have seen Zimbabweans' talent. And I think that it is now time for us to take ownership of the space, to take ownership of the future, because it is only us who can own that space. I always laugh at my parents and tell them that you guys actually are the ones who spent the greater part of the past 40 years suffering. because our time technically hadn't come. You had the mantra to make sure that you inherit us as your children, a better environment. So I think that's our task now as the younger people, to make sure that the next generation that's going to come, the next people that's going to come, they're not going to look at us and say, why didn't you do A, B, C, D? At the very least, let's do what's within our capabilities, and then we can let the rest.
Know your rights, defend them, protect them, because it is your right. Now, this is the situation right now. This is Dara B in proud partnership with We Lead on here, Heart and Soul TV and radio, the alternative. Thank you to all our viewers. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for an amazing discussion. Until next time, this is the situation right now, and I am Dara.